Hello. In this video, we're going to see uh, White's first move, knight f3, and other rare continuations. But it's good to know what to do against these moves because you can meet them in practice. So we're going to see knight f3. This is the main move. And then we have b3, Larson opening, f4, b4, knight c3, a3, g3, and also g4. Basically all the moves that make sense. And we're going to start with the b3, Larson opening. White wants to fianchetto to bishop on b2. This is played sometimes, however, this works very good for us because anyway, we are going to play d6 and we want to play afterwards e5 in order to shut off the dark square bishop. And White normally continues with bishop b2. If d4, right now we go e5. And it's not clear what White achieved. So bishop b2, the most flexible move, leaving White plenty of options. And here, of course, we go e5. So this is good. We put a pawn chain against the dark square bishop. And here White has some options. We can see d4, c4, and even e3. First of all, d4. This is a very rare sideline, but White tries to do something about this bishop on b2. He wants to open it right away. However, like this, we can gain a tempo taking on d4. White takes on d4 with the queen, and now we have this knight c6 with tempo. And in these situations when we can take on d4 and White is forced to take with the queen, I really like the knight going to c6 rather than d7. It's well placed and it's fighting for the center very well. And here, okay, the natural retreat is queen d2, at least to consider the queen developed, or there is also an option to go queen e3. So first of all, let's see this queen e3. This is an interesting check. White's idea is if we go queen e7 to reach a slightly better endgame, but we don't want to swap the queens, not just yet, because I think the white queen is misplaced on e6, so we go bishop e6. We're pairing this check by developing a piece. And now, okay, White needs to justify somehow this queen on e3, so he goes knight h3. This is the only reasonable continuation. White wants to bring the knight to f4, hitting the bishop on e6. But we have good solutions against this, and we're going to play d5, opening this dark square bishop, and there is also a threat of d4. we are exploiting white's awkward placed pieces. White goes knight f4, at least to bring the knight into play. And we go d4, of course. Again with tempo, and again shutting off this bishop. So d4 is the move we want to have on the board. And here black already took the initiative. The queen is under attack. White cannot take on e6 because after d takes e3, white loses. And otherwise, if white moves the queen, we can just go knight f6, and we have a huge development lead. So this is queen e3. Let's see queen d2 instead. This is a natural reply. And we follow up in the same fashion with d5. Yeah, it's not, of course, it's not good to move a pawn twice in the opening, but here we just take control over the center. And we freeing up our dark square bishop. Let's say white goes knight c3. And this has an idea. If we go d4, then there could be knight b5, and white acquires a target, the d4 pawn. But instead, we can just go knight f6, simply defending the pawn and developing another piece. Long castle. White says, I insist. And again, we can just defend the pawn with bishop e6. Here, white should strive to open up the position, so that's why e4. Otherwise, we just have very, very comfortable position. And here we can take knight e4. This is the most forcing continuation. Knight takes e4, d takes e4. Of course, white doesn't want to trade queens, and now white is a pawn down. He is going to move the queen somewhere, attacking our queen, and then he wants to get back the pawn. So queen e3. We develop bishop d6. Even if white goes with the queen somewhere else, queen e2, queen e1, we just go bishop d6. All the same, I mean, probably queen f4 makes sense, because queen e2, queen e1, there could also be queen g5. So basically queen e3 is the good move. Queen e3 or queen f4. Bishop d6, and this contains a little trap. White cannot take on g7 because this loses to bishop a3 check. That's a big problem with the rook on d1. So white takes a pawn back. And now we go queen g5. We take advantage of this check to castle long, king b1, and long castle. So our king is feeling much better on the queen side. On the king side, okay, white has this bishop, so we would have been under some pressure. But on the king side, it's just fine, and we also have some lead in development. White still needs to complete the development. Yeah, the rook on d8 is actually very active here. So knight f3, it comes with tempo. And now I like this move, queen a5. Maybe other moves, other queen moves are possible, but queen a5, it's good because we want to go bishop f5 or knight b4. So we keeping these active options. Also, we covering our king and And maybe we can create threats on the white king. The position is probably balanced, but I like black's chances here. So let's go back. There is c4, but this looks like a worse version of first move c4, because this bishop on b2 here is restricted by the wall of pawns. So in this case, we just need to make normal developing moves. Knight f6. Here I want to point out that f5 is not so precise, because white can go d4. And if we go e4, then d5, and this opens up the bishop. And we want to avoid this. So sometimes the setup with f5 is possible, but here we're going to skip it. Just go knight f6. White goes g3 here. The double fianchetto setup. And we also go g6 to fianchetto the bishop. Bishop g2, bishop g7. Well, the game just started, but we already have a comfortable position here. I think usually in this kind of positions, white would like to push on the pawns on the queen side, but here he already played b3, and this bishop on b2. Well, it's not bad, but it's also not really active. And we have easy play. We just want to go castle, then rook e8. a5 could be useful to stop any pawn advance on the queen side by white. And then either c6 or knight c6 with a comfortable position for black. So let's move on. e3 is another option, probably the most flexible move for white. We go knight f6. Again, I want to remind you about this f5 idea. Is not so good because white has d4, immediately breaking our pawn chain, and if e4 then d5, white opens up the dark square bishop. So we just want to avoid this. That's why we go knight f6. And here we're going to cover several moves. c4, knight f3, knight e2, and d4. c4, okay, white tries to stay flexible, and he's preparing d4. Here we go g6. Again, the idea is to fianchetto the bishop. White goes for d4. White wants to break the center before developing the knight. And here we prefer opening up the position with e takes d4, as white's knight is still on g1, and white cannot take back with the knight. And okay, then we can go bishop g7, castle with easy play, rook e8, probably knight c6, and so on, with a good position for black. So there's also knight f3. Looks like a natural move, but actually white doesn't really want to go d4 afterwards because of e4, and now the knight is exposed. So we just continue our fianchetto setup, g6. And here we're going to see either c4 or d4. First of all, c4. With this move, white takes control over the d5 square. So he wants to follow up with d4, and then after e4, we don't have d5. That's the point. Well, we just go bishop g7, d4, and now we follow up e4. This is the usual reaction in these cases. I mean, with a knight on g1, we would have taken on d4, but like this, e4 comes with tempo, knight fd2, and now since white has this pawn on c4, d5 is not so good, but we can go c5. So we're switching the ideas, and this works because we have this bishop on g7, and black has a nice position here. The knight on d2 is misplaced, and we just make natural moves like castle, rook e8, knight c6, bishop f5, and so on. Maybe h5 even to secure the g4 square, but that will come later. So black is totally fine here. Okay, let's see what happens if white breaks the center right away with d4. Again, we go e4. This is usually a good reply when it comes to tempo. 92. And here, okay, like bishop g7 with the castle, rook e8 is also fine. But since white skipped the move c4, we can go d5 and build up a strong center. And now we want to switch developing this bishop. We don't want to develop it on g7 anymore, but instead we want to go bishop d6, c6, and so on. Let's say white goes c4 just to challenge the center, but there is this reply c6. We're consolidating the center. And the plan is to go bishop d6, bishop f5, h5. Okay, castle later on. I guess a6, b5 is another interesting idea. And basically, we have very comfortable play because of the strong center. Who would have thought that by advancing little by little d6 and so on, and then we'll get such a beautiful center. So let's see. Now knight e2. Well, this looks a bit strange, but and the knight is quite passive on e2, I have to say. But white keeps some ideas to go either f4 or d4 to break our pawn chain. We can go g6 nevertheless. So I like this when we use the same plan against white's different options, because we don't need to remember many details. Here d4 is the good move. White is challenging the center. f4 is inferior because of knight c6, and already black has an edge because of the misplaced pieces. So yeah, it's an original approach, but white's pieces are misplaced. So d4, and here, of course, knight bd7 is possible, just a natural move. But I think it's more interesting to just push e4, although we're not hitting the knight this time. But like this, we keep the game more complicated, and it's a playable position for both sides. Again, given time, we want to maybe go d5 and support our center, but plenty of options. Probably white won't allow us, and then we'll have to switch to bishop g7 and castle and so on. And now let's see d4 straight away. White just wants to open up his dark square bishop. We take on d4. Again, we want to avoid the move e4 because of d5, and the bishop opens up, and we don't want to see this. So we take on d4. Queen takes d4. White wants to keep the bishop open. Of course, we like to develop with tempo, so knight c6 is there. Queen d2, at least to pretend that the queen is developed on d2. And maybe after moving the knight from b1 to play rook d1 and so on. And now again, we can just go d5 and have a better control over the center. We open up this dark squared bishop. And we can go either bishop d6 or bishop b4 deserves attention as well. And black has a better development here, and I really like his position. So this was the Larson with b3. Now let's see f4. This is Bird's opening. Sometimes I'm confusing the names of the openings, so please bear with me. And how to approach this opening? I'm going to play d6 anyway. Of course, there are other moves here. d5 is the usual reply, but we like d6 nevertheless. And we want to push e5. So white is stopping us with knight f3. And we go knight f6. Now we're also stopping white from pushing e4. Okay, just to say a few words about this f4 move. It is played sometimes. White is usually trying to go g3, bishop g2, castle, and then pretend that it's getting a more active position because of f4, later on trying to get d3 and somehow to make e4 work. But f4 can also be a weakness, and usually black gets good play against this. Here we're going to see knight c3. So let me show this with blue, knight c3. G3 and D3. Just because I put too many arrows. Too many green arrows. So first of all, knight c3. Obviously, we need to think what white wants to do with this move, and it's easy. White wants to expand with e4, and then d4, and so on. So we can just stop all this by going d5. And of course, I wouldn't recommend you to move a pawn twice in the opening, at least not in the first three moves if you don't take something. But after d5, the knight on c3 is misplaced. And we're also stopping e4, and we want to seize some more space with d4. So white has to do something about this. For example, e3 here looks strange. I mean, it's tapping d4, but white doesn't get a good setup, and we just go g6 with fianchetto to bishop with a very comfortable position. That's why, let's say d3 to renew the threat of e4. But we can go d4 now, gaining more space. What can white do? Just go knight e4. And here we can go c5 to reinforce the pawn on d4. Of course, white cannot take on c5. It would just be a blunder because after queen c5, we win a piece. So otherwise, we have more space, and also white strategy failed because this pawn on e2 is backwards. So let me just show you a sample line here. Not knight c5. Bishop d2. Now he has the idea to take on c5 because there is no more check on a5. And of course, we could defend the pawn, but it would be less fun. Instead, we can go knight c6 here. And when white takes the pawn, just go e5. Now the knight is under attack. And we open up the position and we have the initiative here. So knight c3 doesn't really pose problems. Now let's see g3, just to get a reversed Leningrad Dutch. We fianchetto as well, bishop g2, bishop g7, castle, castle. Well, not much to say about these moves, just normal developing moves. But now white has to take a decision, and usually he wants to prepare e4. So in order to do this, he goes d3. Idea is to go e4. White is taking advantage that we played d6, and we don't want to play d5 anymore. But here we have a very interesting move. Of course, before revealing the move, I want to say that if you go c5 here, e4, knight c6, you get a close Sicilian, which is good for black, but you need to know it. So if you don't play the close Sicilian, then you can go for this b5 here. The idea is to just, first of all, break the symmetry. Of course, the position was not symmetrical since white had the pawn on f4, but we get our own play on the queen side. We want to develop with the bishop b7. And we are seizing more space, of course. Obviously, when we make such a move, we need to make sure that white doesn't have any moves with the knight and then to open up this bishop to attack the rook. But here, white doesn't have any tricks. So let's just check, for example, knight e5, so that we don't have c6. But this is a blunder. We can just take the knight. Bishop takes the rook, and now we can just trap the bishop. Okay, it will take some time to take the bishop, but the bishop cannot go out. And this is very important bishop, especially with such a weakened king. White cannot afford to lose the bishop, but he will. So knight e5 is not good. The other move, knight d4, is also not working because we have c6, and white cannot take on c6 because of tricks with queen b6, winning a piece. So this leads nowhere. White is better off not to even try it. Instead, White continues his plan. E4. Now we have this diagonal covered with bishop b7. And we can push the pawns on the queen side, let's say with c5, a5. And obviously black is fine. There is plenty of fight ahead. The game has just started. Um, just to mention that e5 is leading nowhere here because we can take, pawn takes, and then knight d5. So white is better off not to try this. Let's go back. d3. White is trying to play our system against us. He just wants to go e4, bishop e2, castle, and so on. Here we can fianchetto, e4, bishop g7. And now let's see bishop e2. If g3, castle, bishop g2, b5, it will transpose to the line I showed you previously with after castle. So white goes bishop e2. Here we can get a foothold in the center with c5. I mean, probably castle is just as good, but let's go c5, castle, castle. Queen e1 and c3 we're going to discuss. c3, this is the main move, trying to slowly build up the position. But we have unexpected resource, c4, and we're breaking the center. And the position is equal. Afterwards, I mean, if white takes on c4, obviously we're going to take on e4. We can even include some check on b6 if necessary. But we just want to take on d3, then we want to go knight d7, knight c5 to hit the e4 pawn and the bishop on d3. So it's actually good that we have the knight on b8. Yes, so this, if white takes, we can go either knight e4, or we can try to be smart and include this check first and then knight e4. Queen e1. White just wants to checkmate us with queen h4 and then some attack, probably f5, bishop h6, and so on. We're not so worried about this though. Knight c6. We need to finish the development. And here we're going to see a4 to stop us from pushing, or queen h4. I just want to mention that f5 immediately doesn't really work because we can just take it. And now if queen h4, we have a strong move, which is d5. And black has an extra pawn. So first of all, let's see a4. White is preventing b5. This a4 is useful move. We can go a6, slowly preparing b5. Okay, first of all, we'll probably have to include rook b8, but we're getting there. h3, this is a useful move, controlling the g4 square, and then white wants to bring the bishop to e3. Okay, just rook b8, c3, it makes sense to play this to control d4, b4, also shut off our bishop. We're not impressed, just b5. White is better off to take to open up the rook. A takes b5, and here the position is about equal, but yeah, I like to say this, the game has just started. There is plenty of fight ahead. We'll probably try to go b4 in order to create some weaknesses, and also sometimes c4 can be an option. So white goes queen h4, just not to stop in the middle of the maneuver, bringing the queen closer to our king. And yeah, who likes, nobody likes to get under attack, so we go e6. We want to stop f5 for now. And there is an idea to go knight d7 to trade the queens. Also, of course, we can go b5. The same idea is there. For example, if a4, we can go rook b8, c3, a6, and b5 is there. And it's important that we stop the white's attack. We don't need to worry about the attack, and in the meantime, we have our own play. Here, if white stops us with a5, trying to, okay, knight a5, then the knight would move away from the center, and then white could try some tricks, some attack. But here we can just go c4. Okay, so we covered f4. Let's see another one, b4. Quite a rare move. This is the orangutan opening. White is trying to see some space on the queen side right away. Well, we go d6 anyway. And again, d6 works very well against this setup because we want to play e5 and shut off the dark square bishop. The play can be similar to 1b3, but sometimes the pawn on b4 can be exposed. Bishop b2, and now we go e5. Here white can try different moves, but e3 is the most popular. And we go g6. In this kind of positions, it's important to know the plan. You don't need to know move by move. But usually when white was putting the bishop on b2 like this, we were fianchettoing the bishop on g7. So you need to know this, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop e2, let's say, just developing the pieces. Okay, just to mention that if white goes d4 here, we can take it. So bishop e2, knight f6, castle, castle. Let's say white goes d3 to stop ideas of e4, and then he wants to follow up with knight bd2. Here we can play e5 to break white's pawn structure on the queen side. b5, let's say white gains more space, but okay, now the queen side is blocked. Normally white would have liked to keep options on the queen side. And knight bd7 we can play. Just get the knight out. And we have ideas like b6, bishop b7, Rook e8 is good. At some point, even a4 could be there to disrupt white's coordination. Of course, it's a position with plenty of possibilities, but most likely you will not see b4 first move too often on the board. Now let's see knight c3. This is possible. White sometimes starts like this. It's less flexible than knight f3, of course, but it makes sense. And we go d6. This also makes sense. And the play will most likely transpose to something else. For example, e4 or d4 transposed to what we discussed before. So knight f3, some strange approach to first develop the knights and without pawns. We go knight f6. We want to get a Philidor setup. e5 is also possible and good. But knight f6, d4. Let's say knight bd7. And now, yeah, just transposes b4, bishop f4 transposes to London and Jobava setups chapter. Bishop g5 also transposes, and e4, e5 at move 4, not the first move, reaches the Philidor. a3. Well, sometimes white goes for this mysterious little move. Most likely it will be useful later on. And with this, white tries to get us out of the book. We go d6. We follow our own plan. b4, of course, white can make any other move here. There's nothing wrong with his position, but let's say he played h3 to follow up with b4. And we will go e5, since after b4, most likely white will fianchetto the bishop on b2, and we want to restrict it. Then bishop b2, and we fianchetto the bishop here. And it's similar play to b4 at first move. Now let's see g4, the Grob attack. This is quite a dubious move, but it has its own fans. It's not justified because white is weakening the king side. Of course, e5 or d5, the principal moves, but there's nothing wrong with our move d6, immediately attacking on g4. Bishop g2, this is the idea in the Grob that if we take on g4, white takes back on b7. We're not falling for that. We just play knight c6. Now we're renewing the threat. h3, white needs to defend the pawn. e5, we like to take control over the center. c4, white also tries to get some grip on the center. And here it's important to undermine white's pawn chain. That's why g4 first move is not so good. White had to spend another move with h3 to defend the pawn on g4, and now we can just go h5. So white has to take on g5, otherwise loses a pawn. And I like this move here, queen g5, hitting the bishop. and white has some problems to solve already because there is no good place for the bishop. If bishop f3, then we can jump knight d4 and take the bishop. Of course, the h5 pawn is going nowhere. We can take it later on. So already black got an advantage as soon as move 5. Let's see, g3. Okay, g3 is not a bad move. White wants to fianchetto the bishop. It's quite flexible, but it's not. White is not fighting for the center right away, so that's why other moves are more popular. We go d6. Basically, here almost every move is good, but we just stick to our plan, d6, bishop g2. Other moves, let's say e4 or d4 or knight f3 would just transpose. So the moves that makes the difference is bishop g2. We go e5, this is our setup. And here we're going to see e4. Again, c4 or knight f3 or d4 would transpose. White goes e4. We are getting our Philidor setup. And here white has this e4 pawn defended, so he can go knight e2. Idea is to go d4 afterwards. Bishop e7 and d4. So with this move order, white seemingly tricked us a little bit, but we are again not impressed. These are similar positions to first move e4, d6, and g3, where we recommended d5, but you can also play positions like this if you like, if you don't want to go d5. And here it's important to understand what wants to do. He wants to push c4, knight c3, castle, and get a grip. So we are recommending this strange looking move, b5. But this is preventing c4. Now c4 is not possible anymore. Castle. Obviously, white cannot take advantage of this diagonal so far. Because we have this foothold in the center, this pawn on e5, it's stopping white bishop. Also, it's restricting the knight on e2. And afterwards, we can just complete the development, let's say with knight bd7, bishop b7, or we can even push c5, a5, and gain more space. It's a new position. There is plenty of play ahead. Let's go back. Finally, let's talk about knight f3. This is a flexible move. It allows transpositions to different openings. We're going to play d6 against this as well, preparing e5. And of course, with other moves, here we just transpose to other chapters like d4 or e4 or c4. So these moves would simply transpose. And now we're going to see g3 or b3, some moves that bring something new. b3, strategically, this doesn't make too much sense against our setup, because after e5, when white will play the bishop to b2, it will be restricted. And because white already has the knight on f3, we are already threatening e4 here. White has to consider this. And we're going to see bishop b2, very natural, or d3 to stop e4. So first of all, bishop b2, this is very natural move, but it's also careless. Because after e4, black is already better. There is no good square for the knight. Knight g1 probably. What else? I mean, if white goes knight d4 here, then there is c5 and knight. Okay, white doesn't lose a piece, but his situation is not much better than that. So knight g1. At least like this, white can pretend he's going to attack the pawn on e4 later on, but after d5, we just got a nice center. And I don't think white can justify the loss of tempo with knight f3 and knight g1. So obviously, black is already better. So d3, but this looks strange to play like this, to include these moves d3 and b3. Okay, since white made these weird moves, we can get a good position in several ways. Knight e6 is very natural. f5 is also a good move here, since yeah, we just have easy development. But knight c6 has a trap, contains a trap here. So after bishop b2, of course, since white played b3, it makes sense to put the bishop to b2. Now this move g5 is possible. Very nice, since the bishop was not controlling the g5 square anymore. This is possible. And of course, we're threatening g4 to gain even more space on the king side. And if white stops it with h3, we can just fianchetto, bishop g7, and black is already slightly better. Notice that white had to make all these moves like d3 to stop e4, h3 to stop g4. It's quite an interesting fact. So b3 is not so good in this instance. Let's see g3. Many times white players, they just go g3, bishop g2, castle, and then they decide what to do next. While we know what to do, we just take control over the center. And now we're going to talk about d4, e4, and bishop g2. Bishop g2 is, of course, the most natural. d4 is white is trying to act in the center, and this was tried a couple of times, but black is just better, since black can go e4. Again, hitting this knight and seizing space, knight fd2, f5, but if you play d5, don't worry, this is also good. No, pawn on g3 is not really justified here. So f5, c4, white is trying to control the center a little bit. Knight f6, bishop g2, and c6. And now we want to consolidate the center with d5, and bishop on g2 is lacking perspectives. It's hitting on a wall of pawns. And if white goes d5 here to stop us from pushing d5, we can just go g6, bishop g7, with a good position. So black is already preferable here, slightly better. E4 looks strange, but it's possible. At least white is stopping us from pushing e4. We go knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn. White defends it with d3. And of course, it's a symmetrical position. And in this situation, it's good to try and break the symmetry right away. So black goes c5 here, with idea to better control the center after knight c6. Bishop g2. Of course, here or in the next moves, if white goes c4, the position will just be blocked, and a long maneuvering play will follow. So bishop g2, knight c6, castle, and now bishop e7 to break the symmetry. We want to follow up with the castle. Then a possible plan is to go b5 and gain some space on the queen side. And black white won a nice game, and he had a good position in Ilan Party against Leon in Kavala 2023. You can find the game in the model games chapter. So bishop g2. Like, okay, bishop g2 is the most natural move. And here we go f5. We have this plan, knight f6, bishop e7, castle, queen e8, and so on. And maybe some kingside attack later on. d3, white is going for a king's Indian setup. Castle would lead to the same thing. So d3 first, let's say knight f6. Now castle, bishop e7. We slightly prefer this setup with the bishop on e7 to g6, bishop g7, because maybe we, with bishop e7, we could have some attacking ideas after castle, queen e8, queen h, queen h5. So bishop e7, and here knight bd2 or e4. Of course, c4 would transpose. c4 is also a very natural move, but we're not going to discuss it here. Knight bd2. This is a strange move, kind of passive, but it's possible. Okay, we go castle just to see what white is going to do next. e4 makes sense. For example, if c3, again, some strange move, we just go on with queen e8 and queen h5, just following our plan. So e4, knight c6, we need to include all the pieces into play. c3, let's say white wants to prepare b4. And of course, it's possible to go a5, let's say, to just stop this b4 idea, but maybe it's time for an attack. How about that? f4. White takes on f4, and this time we're not going to sacrifice a pawn. We just take e takes f4. It's true that we gave up the center, but on the other hand, now the white king is weaker, and we're going to keep this pawn on f4, which is greatly restricting white's play, for example, this bishop on c1. So d4, this is the logical follow-up. We also go for the logical follow-up with queen e8. The queen is heading to g6. Another useful move is king h8. We want to avoid some check on b3. And although white has a nice center, black has the advantage because we have good attacking chances here. Let's go back. e4, white is immediately fighting for the center. And we continue our development. It doesn't work to take a pawn here. We shouldn't be greedy. It's refuted tactically with knight e5. And now knight is under attack. So don't fall for the cheap tricks. Just develop the pieces first and opportunities will arise. And here there is knight h4 or e takes f5. E takes f5 basically only helps us develop the pieces. So we take with bishop. And then we want to follow up with knight c6, queen d7 with a very nice position. Black is already preferable. If knight h4, trying for some double attack, well, there is bishop c8, but bishop g4 is even better to hit the queen and then gain time to go knight c6. So this e takes f5, it's only helping us. Let's say white goes knight h4 in order to force us to show what we're going to do with the f5 pawn. But white puts the knight on the edge and this has its own drawbacks. And of course we go forward, f4, white takes the pawn. Otherwise we're going to go g5 and it looks already very bad for white. So taking there, we take, e takes f4. It's not necessary to sacrifice a pawn, but knight c6 is also possible, just to mention it. But we can take the pawn. Knight f5, white has to do something with the knight on the rim. If white cannot take on f4 because of knight e4 when the knight on h4 is hanging. Also the bishop is hanging. Basically everything is hanging. Actually the bishop is the piece that we want to take the bishop. So knight f5. And now, okay, if we take on f5, we open up this bishop. So this is what white is counting on, but we need to defend the pawn on f4. That is very important in order to restrict the bishop on c1. Of course, then we want to develop with knight c6. And again, it's a new position. It's very unclear. It's not a typical position. It's very unbalanced. But here, white has some center, but the black king looks safer than white's king. So that could be important. And let's say if white goes h4 to undermine our pawn chain, but again, it's not recommended to move the pawns in front of a king. We have knight e8 and to defend on g5, and then we have ideas to go knight g7 and get rid of white's only active piece here. Okay, so we finished this first move options, knight f3 and the rare moves. Let's go for a short recap. It's good to know at least to have an idea how to continue against these moves. Although they are very rare, um, it's well, you go d6 anyway, but it's good to know some follow up. b3 is probably the most popular among these moves, b3 and knight f3. But knight f3 usually transposes to other variations. b3 is not so justified because we get this setup with d65, um, and we just shutting off this bishop. And then e3, let's say knight f6. Here it's important to remember not to go f5 because white goes d4, e4, d5. So you need to avoid this. But you just go knight f6 and okay, if white doesn't go d4, if white goes, let's say, knight f3, just fianchetto on the bishop, and black gets a very good position. Um, Again, f4, okay, you can try also other moves. d5 is the main move, but d6 and knight f6 is also good. Black has easy play. And knight f3, just the typical d6, g3, e5. Let's say this fianchetto line, but black again has nothing to worry. Probably the best for white is to try to transpose with c4, but this leads to fully playable positions where I like black's chances. Of course, they're about equal, they're balanced, but all the pieces are on the board and black can try to for a win. So uh, during the game, I would be happy to see these rare sidelines on the board. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.